CBS News presents Douglas Edwards with up-to-the-minute developments from all parts of the world. Mr. Edwards.
Good evening, everybody. Leading the news tonight, it's Washington all the way. The opening of Congress, the indictment for perjury of a former White House intimate, a United Press report concerning Washington. It comes, as it turns out, from Tokyo on the fate of Formosa. UP says it's learned of a secret State Department report sent out from Washington to American attachés, which says that Formosa is of no strategic value to the United States and predicts the island's downfall to the communists. Also in Washington, the State Department makes a public statement on Formosa. It acknowledges that 2 weeks ago it heard a plea from nationalist China for military and other advisors to help prevent the fall of Formosa. And at the same time, administration foreign policy spokesman took issue with proposals by President Hoover, former President Hoover, and by Senator Taft that America use armed strength if necessary to keep the island out of communist hands. And such intervention, they said, might touch off a new world war. The opening of Congress today was caught by the CBS News cameras. The 81st Congress opening its business, the second session, in rather glamorized chambers, but familiar issues such as taxes, government spending, civil rights, and so on, still confront the nation's legislators. Soon after Congress opened, at noon today, the White House announced that President Truman will ask some new taxes in a special message to Congress, and it's expected that Mr. Truman's State of the Union message tomorrow will touch off 1950s campaign fireworks. And now, Speaker Sam Rayburn opening the House and swearing in new members.
Abbott. Abernathy. Abbott. Abernathy, present. On this roll call, 336 members answered to their names and quorum. Up. Chair lays before the House following two communications from the clerk of the House. December 16, 1949, the Honorable Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. A certificate of election in due form of law showing the election of Edna F. Kelly. Hold up your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter, so help you God? Answer is I do.
A flood of bills will go before the congressmen for consideration in this new session, many of the bills introduced last year. Here are some of the main proposals to balance the budget by increasing taxes. Mr. Truman asked unsuccessfully for those taxes last year. Now again, the report is increased taxes are unlikely to pass. Instead, Congress will aim to revise the entire federal tax structure. Speaker Rayburn said that this afternoon. Another plan, expansion of the Social Security law. It would increase benefits to retired workers. It's considered certain to pass since this is an election year. One of the hottest issues is civil rights legislation. Anti-lynching and other bills to protect the rights of minority groups are unlikely to pass. The Southern Bloc is expected to filibuster. To protect the nation's tenants, continuation of rent control is proposed. Strong arguments from tenants and landlords. Action uncertain. Number one on labor's list, repeal of the Taft-Hartley law. But no serious repeal effort is in prospect, and it's unlikely that any action will be taken. Late this week, repeal of the tax on oleomargarine will go before the legislators. There's a likelihood it will be repealed, despite pressure from the dairy states. These are the most important among the thousands of bills which have been dropped into the hopper since the 81st Congress opened 1 year ago. Tomorrow, President Truman goes before the Congress to deliver his State of the Union message. In general terms, Mr. Truman is expected to touch on spending, which is one of the big issues of the session, economy and government, tax relief, and so on. Well, another Washington development, a State Department order to Hungary to close two of its consulates in this country, the one in New York and also in Cleveland. Now, this move is in retaliation for the arrest of an American businessman. And for a former White House visitor, some bad news today, an indictment on 4 counts of lying before a congressional investigating committee last summer. The federal grand jury accused John Marigon of committing perjury at a closed Senate committee hearing when the senators tried to learn something of Marigon's business dealings in connection with the 5%er probe. Then later on, at a public hearing, Mr. Marigon was more wary under questioning, had very little to say on the advice of his lawyer, as this film report shows.
Did you not state to the committee that you had not received any pay from any department of government or from any person to appear before any department of government in connection with any contracts or any other matter pending before agencies of government?
I refuse to answer on the advice of counsel on the grounds that my answer might tend to incriminate me.
In the earlier closed hearing, Marigon denied to senators that he ever made money by representing private companies in business deals with the government. The indictment claims that this denial was false. Now, should a trial jury convict Marigon on the 4 counts of the indictment, he could be sent to jail for as long as about 40 years. In labor developments today in Illinois, about 16,000 mine workers were idle in a mysterious strike. The walkout shut down about 48 big mines. The state union president has ordered his men to return to work on Monday, and his order followed a conference with John L. Lewis. The miners, who've been on a 3-day work week, were supposed to work today and tomorrow. There's no comment from Lewis. Dr. Herman Sander, the New Hampshire doctor facing charges of mercy killing in connection with the death of a cancer patient, has been indicted for first-degree murder by a grand jury tonight. The doctor told Sheriff Thomas O'Brien, on the left, that he isn't guilty of any legal or moral wrong, although he admitted injecting air into the patient's bloodstream. Dr. Sander has the support of the local minister, shown on the right, and most of the community. They had petitioned the grand jury not to indict him for murder. But Manchester County Solicitor William M. Craig says the law gives no one the right to kill, that Dr. Sander should go on trial for murder. The physician and his wife have made no public statements since his arrest. Dr. Sander has been performing his normal duties as a physician in a small town in New Hampshire. News from overseas. A London report tonight says Britain has reversed the drain on her gold and dollar reserves since devaluation of the pound. And this news, which may be announced officially sometime tomorrow by Sir Stafford Cripps, Chancellor of the Exchequer, increases the likelihood of an early general election in Great Britain. The Egyptians have been electing a new parliament today, and in early and unofficial returns, the party that's been pretty much on the outside since the war, the liberal Wafdists, appears to be sweeping ahead. Observers are speculating the election will show a trend against the present Sahdist majority because of the shock, for one thing, to the national pride at Egypt's defeat in Palestine. Nearby, Israel's parliament, holding its first session in Jerusalem, defying the General Assembly's decision to internationalize the Holy City. Jerusalem's mayor attends, emphasizing that the Jewish part of the city welcomes Israel's parliament. The government's determination to make Jerusalem its capital is a direct expression of the people who voted it into power. Only 1/10 of the population lives in Jerusalem, but they all consider the Holy City the heart and the soul of their nation and the rightful seat of their government. Joseph Sprinzak, the Speaker of the Parliament, and Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion join with the rest of Israel's leaders in voicing the belief that the world will eventually approve their decision. Now some news from Paris. Films of bomb damage at the Polish embassy there. The front door and 20 windows at the chancellery are shattered by an early morning explosion. Poland's ambassador lay asleep in his quarters only 100 yards away. He wasn't hurt, but a French night watchman was injured by flying glass. No immediate reasons were given for the incident, but some believe the bombing was done in retaliation against Poland's arrest and expulsion of French citizens and diplomats. In New York, some Texas hijinks this afternoon. 3,000 gallons of very precious water trucked in from Austin, Texas to New York to help the city's water shortage. Now, this is a token gesture, of course, but it's really appreciated by the crowd and officials. It's this way, partner. Austin's mayor wanted to prove the Lone Star State isn't completely arid, and so he helped sponsor the water wagon, which reached Manhattan after a 7-day trip. Water Commissioner Stephen Carney there has a touch of Texas in his heart as the shutterbugs snap away and Broadway showgirls accept some of the Highland Lakes water. Tomorrow, the traveling tank truck will head for the Bronx, where the eyes of Texas and New York City will be upon it. The water will be dumped into the Jerome Park Reservoir. From Texas to New York to out to California, the Tournament of Roses and the 1.5 million persons in Pasadena yesterday saw lovely Mary Brown reign as Queen of the Roses. The theme of the $350,000 floral tribute is Our American Heritage. This parade went on and on. 72 gaily decorated floats entered in the big parade, stretching out for 6 miles. The Declaration of Independence, the prize-winning float in the theme division. Hour after hour, the parade of floats continued in Pasadena, and each girl prettier than the last. Once in a while, a band got into the line of march. The Tournament of Roses ends an historical note, the landing of the Pilgrims. Other items in the news of the day. In late afternoon, President Truman appointed a temporary Water Resources Policy Commission. Now, in setting up this new group, Mr. Truman made no reference to the water shortage in New York City, which has focused attention on threats of possible similar situations elsewhere. Members of the new commission are to be paid from the President's emergency fund. It was not disclosed how much they will receive. Mr. Truman directed that the new commission consider the extent and the character of federal participation in water resources programs, an appraisal of the priority of water resources programs from the standpoint of economic and social needs, standards for evaluating the feasibility of such projects, and legislation dealing with development of water resources. And the President would like to have a report not later than next December 1st. In San Diego, California, Vice Admiral Gerald F. Bogan, one of the Navy admirals you know who was involved in that row over the Armed Services unification, has applied for retirement rather than accept a lesser command. And some more news from the Far East. The skipper of the American freighter Flying Cloud again accused the State Department of making a last-minute attempt to hinder his ship's departure for Shanghai. Captain Davis Jones of Chicago said that the U.S. Vice Consul out there, Mr. Fred Hill, boarded the ship this afternoon and met the crew in his presence. Hill said that he had authority from the State Department to pay off the crew members should the ship clear for Shanghai if they had transportation and substance pay back to the United States. And a couple of other items in the news of the day. The magazine editor Henry Luce is reported considering running for the United States Senate from Connecticut. On the Republican ticket, New York stock prices were chopped down a few cents to around $2 a share today in the New Year's first market. Key issues turned out to be quite sensitive to only limited selling pressure. The weather today, Montana in a real state of deep freeze, about 48 degrees near Helena. Snow in Utah and Wyoming, Idaho, stormy along the Gulf of Mexico and Texas. And generally, however, here in New York and out in Chicago, something resembling springtime, 58 degrees here in New York this afternoon. It's really a pretty big country after all. Lots of weather and lots of news. Douglas Edwards saying good night for CBS News.
CBS News has presented Douglas Edwards with late developments in the day's news. Portions of this program were on film, part of which was supplied by Telenews Productions. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.